Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. My name is Robert McCaw. I'm CAIR's National Government Affairs Director, and this is CAIR on the Air, the Muslim Action Hour. And I'm being joined by Sister Danette Zagari Mask, who is our chapter's legal director. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Doing well. I think I just messed up your title. What was it?
It's okay. I'm a nonprofit attorney at CAIR.
Nonprofit attorney at CAIR. There we go. We have a very exciting, very important episode for today for CAIR on the Air, where we will be bringing in a few moments the legal director for our CAIR New York chapter. He's going to talk about a client that has just been wrongly deported, and we're going to hear all about that. But first, I want to hear from you, sister. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I was actually following the case that Ahmed was working on last night. I was sort of hour by hour just checking in with him because really it did come down to the hour, and it's really egregious what happened in that case. I'm really glad that Ahmed is going to come on here. I hope this goes out to a lot of viewers and it raises awareness.
I'm excited to hear from him. On the behind the scenes, I was feeding him contacts to different congressional offices in New York, Connecticut. He was working around the clock, informing these offices. I want to kind of hear from him, the extent of congressional engagement on this case and how we as a community can push for more of that. But before all things, since I'm the Director of Government Affairs, I'm going to throw some government affairs magic in here. Today is National Voter Registration Day, and we need every Muslim to register to vote. National Muslim Voter Registration Day was several weeks back, but now we have another opportunity, another reminder for the American Muslim community to turn out and register to vote. As we've seen already in several states, early voting has started. And throughout the month of October in nearly every state, except for a couple, there's early voting where you can get out and you can mail in your ballot, you can drop it off, you can go to a voting station early where it's not as crowded depending on how your state is set up. But it's really important that the Muslim community starts turning out now and that politicians can say, dang, Muslims vote early, and that they vote often, just not like twice in one election like Trump was advocating for.
Good point.
Good point. So with that,
saying good job, Robert.
Yeah, thank you. I am always stunned when the president encourages people to vote twice, but that'll be a whole nother episode. So with that, I would like to bring on CAIR New York Legal Director Ahmed Mohammed. He is a former CAIR national attorney who's now making it big in New York. I want to hear all the trouble he's getting into, the good type of trouble, the trouble that we need to be getting into, causing trouble for those that are really doing wrong. So, Brother Ahmed, kind of tell us what's going on in New York. What have you been working on?
Assalamu alaikum, Robert. Assalamu alaikum, Sister Danette. Thank you so much for having me. And just to reiterate your call, please, everybody, go register to vote. Visit muslims.vote. I can't tell you and stress it enough that voting is how we make our voices heard in the electoral process. Now to New York. I think that what I just want to talk about is what we've kind of been living the last several days here in New York. And that is a recent lawsuit that we filed on Friday evening. It was a federal lawsuit against the US government and ICE agents on behalf of a Muslim father and husband, Bakhodir Madjitov, who was a individual that was detained in ICE detention for the last 3 years for no justified reasons whatsoever. And really his lawsuit centers around an illegal attempt to deport him that occurred in June of last year, June 2019. On the night of June 10th, ICE agents attempted to deport Bakhodir by going to JFK and putting him on a flight, even though he had a court order from the Third Circuit Court of Appeals telling the government that they were not allowed to remove him from the country. They tried to do it anyway. Bakhodir is a strong individual, and when they tried to remove him, he calmly but very sternly told them, I have a federal court order. You cannot remove me from this country. It is illegal, and I'm not getting on this plane. Those federal agents then decided that they were going to force him to get on that plane, and they essentially started to violently beat him. They beat him with their, physical attacks on him. They stunned him with a taser twice for 15 seconds each time. Each time he yelled very loudly, screaming, writhing in pain, screaming for help. And this was all done in a huge crowd of individuals watching at JFK International Airport. Eventually they couldn't get him on this plane, and they started to drag him out of the airport to take him back to the detention facility. And they weren't going to give him medical help at all. Strangely enough, it was either NYPD officers or New York Port Authority officers who intervened and said, what is going on here? Can you imagine the NYPD interfering in an officer abuse situation? That's laughable.
It would have to be egregious.
Right. Yeah. And so they walked up as ICE agents were trying to shove and get Bakhodir into their vehicle, and they said, what's going on? At that point, lo and behold, these ICE agents all of a sudden started asking Bakhodir if he was okay from their beatings. Sure. And if he needed medical attention, which he did. And he was rushed to the emergency room at a local hospital. And it didn't stop from there. One, he was handcuffed everywhere he went. And two, the ICE agents never really allowed him to get medical treatment. They were hovering over him. They were interrupting his answers. They were answering for him. And really, they just weren't allowing him to communicate what was going on with him, like what he was feeling, why he was mangled up in the way that he was. And even when he was being discharged, when the nurse came to give Bakhodir his medical papers and says, here you go, these are your discharge papers, the ICE agents took those papers, read them, and for whatever reason, they decided that these discharge papers needed to go back to the doctor. And, it looks like what happened is the discharge papers were changed, amended, and they don't reflect the incident that actually occurred. They don't reflect the injuries that Bakhodir had and reported, and they don't reflect the severity of what happened to him. And it's a real shame because, up to this day, he still feels a lot of the physical pain. And of course, the psychological impact of what happened is extraordinary. And he didn't receive very good medical care at all, if any, really, because he was shipped back to a long-term detention facility that ICE operates in Alabama.
So he is a very brave individual. Right before he knows that he's going to be deported, he has an asylum case. He's obviously very afraid of being put on that plane and taken back to harm's way. And he's ready to endure abuse that requires hospitalization to keep him, to save his life. Well, so what happened with him?
Yeah.
His family is here, right? Mm-hmm. Let's be very clear that what is happening to Bakhodir is an impact of the cruel and inhumane family separation policies that this administration has implemented with cruelty at the maximum level, right? He has a U.S. citizen wife who lives here in Connecticut. He has 3 U.S. citizen children, all born right here. His youngest child was born a week after he was taken into ICE detention in December of 2017. He has never held his 3rd son in his arms, right? We did a rally and press conference for him yesterday. and his son was there. His son's name is Ibrahim. He's almost 3, and he was holding a sign that says, "I've never hugged my daddy." Right, and that is absolutely horrible. Right,
as a parent, that would be my nightmare.
It's heartbreaking. It just crushes you in every single way possible. And he's fighting. He was fighting to stay here to be with his family, but he was also fighting for his life at the same time. Because if ICE deports him, which by all of the information we've gotten so far, he's been deported. He's on a plane right now to Uzbekistan. And he feels sincerely, and we know it, and based on the history of the government in Uzbekistan, he has a very high chance that the moment he lands at the airport in Uzbekistan, he's going to be detained by the government there, and he's going to be put in detention, and he's most likely will face torture and may even face death, by the government there. And so what we did on Friday is we filed this federal lawsuit to hold the ICE agents, hold the government accountable for violating his civil rights and liberties and assaulting him. Now, what we also did, what we said to the judge was, Your Honor, you have to issue a stay of removal. Because if he is removed from this country, you will allow ICE and these agents to escape accountability, to escape responsibility, because there is not a real opportunity for Bakhodir to prosecute his case if he is in a dungeon being tortured in Uzbekistan. Unfortunately, the emergency temporary restraining order that we filed with the district court judge was denied yesterday at 4:30 p.m. And I got to say, CAIR New York is not doing this work alone. Let me be very, very clear. There have been some amazing lawyers at the New Haven Legal Assistance Association, their Immigrant Rights Clinic, which is a Yale law clinic. Those lawyers are amazing. They were here in New York City yesterday. We were working with our masks on in a conference room for the hearing at 4:30. And as soon as that emergency order got denied, we spent the next 3+ hours in that room, and we appealed that ruling on an emergency basis to the Second Circuit.
So explain again. I mean, I got to hear some of that last night, and I want our viewers to hear that. I mean, what was it like being in that room? I mean, how many attorneys were in there? You all were doing this nonstop, hour to hour, and just pleading for this man's safety.
Yeah. So let me do the math correct. So there was, we had 3 licensed attorneys, all working at the same time on different parts of the appeal. We had a law student who was also working with us, nonstop, and we had an IT individual to help us with the IT issues, just in case we ran through anything, help us upload the documents, help us figure out how the court system, filing system works. And of course, we were talking to the clerk of court, step by step. It was a team effort, and those, everybody, did their part. And we got the appeal to the Second Circuit filed at around 7:30, 8 o'clock last night. Unfortunately, shortly before midnight, we learned that the Second Circuit judge denied our emergency request for a stay. And that meant that ICE was going to be allowed to put Bakhodir on a chartered flight that they had chartered and fly him back to Uzbekistan and remove him. And unfortunately, despite a lot of efforts, we weren't able to stop his removal, and that's really shameful, really disappointing. We're all very sad. But I want to say this, that something that has really touched my heart is that Bakhodir has an amazing family. His wife Medina is incredibly strong, and I can't say enough about how courageous she is, and what a strong individual she has been throughout this whole entire process. And we're going to continue fighting for Bakhodir. We're going to continue to do what we can to make sure that these agents are held accountable.
You know, I'm looking at the CNN headlines for this. Since ICE detainee alleges officers beat him after he refused to comply with the legal deportation.
Yeah.
They're covering up a crime. They're literally trying to get rid of their malfeasance, their abuse, their evidence. They're trying to make sure he can't be heard of again by putting him in a country that will most likely detain him on spot when he arrives there. What's our advocacy angle? What are we doing now to continue to raise this case, give any chance of hope we can for his return, help his family? What's happening?
So he has avenues that he can pursue for lawful status here in the United States, which is what he had been asking courts over and over to allow him to do here in the United States, because it makes absolutely no sense to remove him when he has real ways to pursue lawful status. He actually has an approved petition to become a lawful permanent resident here in the United States, right? Because his wife is a U.S. citizen spouse. She has applied through USCIS to gain lawful status for Bakhodir. USCIS has approved that petition. If ICE had allowed him to remain in this country to see that petition through the process, he would have gained a green card, and he would have been a lawful permanent resident here in the United States. But ICE was intent on removing him, even though he has zero criminal history. He has never been alleged to commit any wrongdoing, and he is a community man, an individual. In fact, when he was arrested, he was a healthcare worker, right? In COVID, he would have been right now. He's an essential worker. He was a healthcare worker taking care of the elderly, working in a home health facility, right? The facilities that need essential workers the most during COVID. And of course, to add even more to the cruelty of ICE, Bakhodir is COVID-19 positive right now. And he obviously contracted COVID-19 while he was in detention with ICE. He had requested on 2 occasions to be released because he is a high-risk individual for contracting COVID-19. Both occasions, ICE denied him that request. And the latter time, the New Haven Legal Assistance Association actually submitted a 20-plus page humanitarian request to ICE to release him because he's a high-risk COVID-19 individual. And guess what? ICE rejected that request in a mere, I believe, 18 minutes. I don't even something up. So it's very.
So it seems very cavalier. I mean, a lot of people have had this life's man really in their hands, from the justices, from the judiciary, the ICE agents, and it seems like the people that are just investing and pumping so much time and care and love and resource is the advocacy community. You did everything that you can do. You pulled out all the stops, right? I mean, Ahmed, I've been talking to you through this whole ordeal. But you need people on the other side to really give consideration and thought to the consequences of these policies and their actions.
Yeah, and thank you, Danette. Let me just add one more thing, Brother Robert, is that I want to give a shout out, number one, to the Free Bakhodir Coalition, which the Connecticut Bail Fund was a main leader of, and so was the Connecticut the Connecticut Immigrant Rights Alliance. They did an amazing job in this coalition. They created a website, which all of you can still go to and support Bakhodir and his family. It's called freebakhodir.org. That's free, and then you spell his name, let me make sure I'm spelling this right. Give me 1 second, because if I get it wrong, you all are going to get it wrong as well. So it's free, Bakhodir, BAKHODIR.org. We also, we made a MoveOn.org petition.
Good.
We did action calls as well, calling ICE officials. And of course, Robert from CAIR National, joined the efforts as well, connecting us to a lot of elected officials, Senator Blumenthal, Senator Murphy's office, Representative John Larson. We even contacted Representative AOC here. We contacted Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, and all these congressional offices, all these senators. We think that they did their best and they made sincere efforts to reach out to ICE and to make sure that they were speaking out on Bakhodir's behalf.
I'm sorry he didn't get the justice so far that he deserved, but absolutely you all did everything that you could do. I want to ask a question before broadening the discussion to ICE abuses. I want to talk specifically about the allegations against LaSalle Corrections Facilities in Georgia. What can actually happen to ICE from this lawsuit at this point?
So the lawsuit is names two types of individuals, right? So there's the U.S. government that's being sued under the Federal Tort Act to get money damages for Bakhodir's injuries, and then we're also suing the individual ICE agents, right, for personal liability under a Supreme Court precedent called Bivens. And so the whole entire lawsuit is based around money damages to compensate Bakhodir for the injuries he suffered, for the injuries he's still suffering, and of course, the ramifications of those injuries moving forward into the future. So we're talking about a lot of damages here because he has been impacted and has suffered tremendously.
And there's human rights organizations. I remember you saying that you all have alerted some organizations to keep an eye, even though he's out of our jurisdiction now. Hopefully, they understand that there's many eyes watching.
So we're going to be, we're going to be watching to see, what happens to Bakhodir. Obviously, we're all praying, and we want all of you, especially individuals who are watching and spreading this message, to pray for Bakhodir, that he ends up, being safe. Pray for his family. And pray for the family unification. And I know that, the folks from the attorneys at the New Haven Legal Assistance team, they're going to continue working on his immigration case as well, while we work with them on this federal lawsuit here in New York State.
In the meantime, I'm going to make sure to work with you so that we put the Uzbekistan embassy on alert that we're watching the status of this case and this individual, and that not a hair on his head should be harmed, because we have to go at all angles.
God willing.
And going to the larger issue of ICE abuses, the news has hit us that Dawn Wooten, she's the whistleblower who was a former employee at LaSalle Correctional Facility. That's one of these private facilities running an ICE facility. And she's now being represented by the Government Accountability Project and then Project South. And a complaint has come out, and she's detailing allegations of unsafe conditions, but in terms of exposure to COVID-19 that's preventable, unsafe conditions for the people who are detained there, and shockingly, allegations of forced sterilization that are reminiscent of forced sterilizations that our government has perpetrated in the past against African Americans, Native Americans, and those in Latinx community. It's nothing new. It's if this is true, it's happening again. The American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology, put out its own statement of alarm about the allegations that have come out, and they outlined safe practices for deciding when hysterectomies in rare cases should be the choice, and it should always be done with the consent. And apparently that these detainees are saying that they didn't understand. These women are saying they didn't know what was happening. They really couldn't understand the paperwork. They woke up from these procedures not really clear about what had happened to them. And against medical advice, apparently, because the procedures for having procedures that result in the loss of fertility. According to this College of Obstetrics and Gynecology, is, you know, to provide full informed consent of medical procedures with translators available that can really explain the ramifications, and also all of the alternative procedures other than loss of fertility to treat some of the conditions that have led to these hysterectomies. So it's, you know, it's happening. It feels like, you know, everywhere, and it takes taking the whistleblowers and those who are brave enough to sit there at the airport like your client and not get on that plane to bring it to the public's eye.
The U.S. has a very long, shameful history of forced sterilization. We can go back to the early social eugenics movements in the early 1900s, all the way to sterilization of unwed mothers, to nearly 30% of the population of Puerto Rico at one point, of all women there. And that this happens in the U.S., and it should not happen, but it's happening now. And there's a long, dark history of forced sterilization in the U.S. And this is not an isolated incident. This is part of a dark U.S. legacy that is, you know, just reemerging in the Trump administration, in ICE, which, as we just heard earlier, is really a rogue agency that does not always follow the law. Ahmed, what's your take?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's very disgusting what is going on here, but I don't think any of us are, you know, shocked at the egregious violations, especially the, you know, when it comes to medical care that ICE is providing individuals. You know, the whistleblower is certainly a hero. I applaud everything that, you know, the courage that she's had to step forward and make these allegations and expose what is happening. I know for a fact, you know, people have been speaking about the atrocities in ICE detention centers when it comes to COVID-19. Bakhodir, our client in this situation, contracted COVID-19 in ICE detention. And instead of releasing him from detention, what ICE began to do was they put him in solitary confinement. And they have done that. Well, not just silencing him, but punishing him. He was in a square room for 23 hours a day during solitary confinement, and could only leave for that one short hour. And so it's a punishment. Solitary confinement in jail is a punishment that you give to punish individuals to the maximum extent possible.
Which is very controversial, right? It's like psychological torture. Many people deem it that way.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it is. It's torture. We know it is. It has huge psychological impacts. And so ICE has a horrible track record. You know, for the women who were victims to this forced sterilization, it is just, it's cruel,
Tremendous.
It's inhumane. It's this tremendous stain in America's history and what America should stand for. We should be better than this. I don't know how this doctor is not currently under investigation for his medical license. I mean, it's very clear under the law that doctors have to get what's called informed consent from the patient before they can perform any type of surgery, especially a surgery of this nature, which is extremely invasive. And, you know, these victims, I don't know where they're located today, but they need to remain in the United States at a minimum so that they can pursue their lawsuits against this doctor and against ICE as well for violating their civil rights, their civil liberties, their bodies, and to make sure that, you know, this doctor doesn't do this to other, you know, patients in the future. Well, it's
that there is a group of legislatures that are calling on the Department of Homeland Security. I believe Nancy Pelosi led that, and they are asking for an investigation. Apparently something of the sort is going on. A report is supposed to come out tomorrow. And, you know, in these situations, really, we look at the 1989 Whistleblower Act, which protects people like Don Wooten, protects heroes, and encourages them to come forward. Hopefully there are other individuals, if these abuses are going on in these facilities, who are willing to keep coming forward and knowing that this act absolutely protects them. their security and their livelihood.
Yeah, and this is a bit off topic, but I think it's relevant, and I want to say this. This is one of the reasons why, number one, it is outrageous that these facilities are being populated in this way. This administration has taken every step possible to put as many immigrants into these detention facilities as possible. Immigrants that have absolutely zero reason to be in detention.
And many of them are victims. A lot of the women that are coming across the border seeking asylum, they have been, victims of sexual assaults.
Yep.
Horrible thing. And then to have their bodies violated, to reach a port of safety, and then to be criminalized and forced into medical procedures that further violate their bodies, strip them of everything, every kind of sense of safety, dignity, hope that they have. Where else can they go? We have a responsibility as Americans, all of us, because this is being done with our tax dollars. We have a responsibility, and people like you give their whole entire careers and lives to it. Everyone can do something. What are some of the things that you, Robert, and you, Ahmed, recommend those viewers who are watching who are really angry about what they're hearing and they want their voices to be heard?
Call their member of Congress and just grill them on what they are going to do. And signing a letter asking for an investigation is a good start, but every member of Congress should be making a public call on the Trump administration, on ICE, on this doctor to come to full account, because this is an egregious abuse. These people are in U.S. custody. That means they are in U.S. care. If you are in a detention facility, you are under the responsibility of the U.S. government, and the U.S. government, if these allegations prove true, have absolutely failed these women. They have harmed these women, and if any of them have already been deported, they have once again gotten rid of the evidence of a crime. These women should be invited back into the U.S. if they've been deported. They need U.S. assistance, and I hope they have one heck of a civil lawsuit on their hands.
Yeah.
Definitely. But you should be contacting your members of Congress, and you should also be asking any person running for office who can touch the federal government, who interacts with ICE in their own backyard in the states, what is your position on this and what are you doing?
Excellent point.
Issue.
Absolutely. Excellent points, Robert. I have three things, right? And the first one is vote. I can't tell you how to vote, right? We can't do that at CAIR. We're a 501c3 organization. But what we can tell you is you need to use your right to vote. That means you need to go register to vote today. You need to make sure that you vote in every single election, whether that is local, state, community boards, education boards, or federal elections, or for president of the United States. You need to vote every single time, so that you know those elected officials are hearing from you and know that you're going to hold them accountable. Number two, you need to support organizations like CAIR, like Project South, and others with your dollars, right? So that we can go out and continue to advocate for our communities and do it in a way that is, impactful on a state, citywide, and national level. And number three, you need to take action. That means when there is a call to action on an issue, like Robert has mentioned, right, we need you to step up, right? Whether that's signing that petition, you got to go sign it and then get 10 of your friends to sign it. And then you got to make sure that you share it with 1,000 of your friends.
Absolutely.
When we say make these phone calls, it means you got to make the phone call. It means you got to have a party that's socially distant to make these phone calls with your friends and your family members. That means signing up to our newsletter so that when we have a major issue happening, you know about it and you're stepping forward. Because yes, you have to hold elected officials accountable, but you have to hold yourself accountable too. Sure. And making sure that you're involved in the community, that you're giving back in the community is how you hold yourself accountable.
Activism isn't just liking a Facebook post, it's taking action. It's not shaking your head, it's shaking the phone and saying something. Or clicking on an action alert.
Yep.
or donating to the attorneys.
Or donating, yes, absolutely.
Attorneys can keep doing what they do. Thank you so much, Ahmed.
If you like hearing these types of messages from CAIR, whether it's CAIR New York or CAIR National, fund CAIR, because we are going to bring this information to light, and we're going to activate you, and we're going to challenge you to not only just give to us, but to act. So please keep it coming. With that, we're going to wrap up today's program. Any concluding messages?
Keep up the good fight, Ahmed.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you to all of you. Thank you to everyone for the work you do. Please keep Bakhodir and his family in your prayers. Thank you.
We are.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Stay strong, stay safe, and tune in again this coming Thursday at 3 o'clock. We're going to have another program. We'll be raising some powerful issues. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for joining CAIR on the Air. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.